Does this work? Testing, 1, 2, 3. Can you hear me? All right, great. Thank you for coming out tonight. It's my pleasure to be here. Paula and I go back longer than we want to admit. About 35 years, you're tired of hearing me tell this story, but about 35, mostly because you don't remember it, I think. About 35 years ago, I was in a laundromat on Genesee Street in Syracuse, where Paula and I were both students in the Master's Lit program, graduate students. She was a year ahead of me, and I walked into the laundromat, and Paula was there, and I kind of waved to her, and I was intimidated because she was the star of the program, and I was just this punk who had wandered off the streets of Mississippi and was surrounded by all these Ivy Leaguers and stuff like that. So I didn't have anywhere near the nerve to go over and actually speak with Paula. But then I started, this is the only cool thing that's ever happened to me in a laundromat, I think. I started folding shirts at some point, and Paula watched me for a moment and then started laughing at me and came over and said, "Is that how your mom taught you how to fold shirts?" And of course it was. That's exactly how my mom taught me how to fold shirts. And at that moment she said, "Let me show you how to do it right." And she demonstrated how to fold a shirt.
Oh no, this is going to be bad. Because
No.
I'm sure I told him wrong. I've thought about this over the years, and no. Oh,
Yes,
Lee.
this is how you fold a shirt.
This is going to kill me.
And every day now, ever since, every time I fold a shirt, I think of Paula. It's like my dad once said, like, you teach a man to fish, you feed him for a day. Well, no, that's not what he said. He said, you give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. You teach a man to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. This is how to properly fold a shirt.
No, Lee, this is what I was afraid of. I taught you wrong.
No.
I have learned since how to fold a shirt. Okay, here's how you fold a shirt. Okay, you see.
I'm too old to change.
Okay, so that's the front of it. You face it to yourself, right?
Yeah.
You fold it in half and half. Okay. Then you fold it over like that.
That's how I fold. That's how my mom
And then
taught
you
me
fold
to,
it like that.
That's how I was folding shirts back then.
So that's what an arrogant young woman I was. I was like, "Oh, Lee, you're folding it wrong."
No, you talked to me. I was thrilled. I didn't care whether. Yeah.
I am so. My deep apologies. I am so sorry. Please fold your shirts like your mom taught you.
So yeah, well, it's too late to go back.
Sorry about that.
Anyway, the point being, memory is a funny thing. We've kind of compared notes about Syracuse many times, and we'll find that our memories don't overlap necessarily. We have different memories of different events, et cetera, et cetera. And Paula's novel is a book.
Go ahead, keep talking.
That as you read it, you're going to think it's written from life. The only question I've ever been asked as an author is, did this actually happen? And it can be kind of annoying to get that question repeatedly forever. But in a sense, it's a compliment because people feel like you had to have lived this to have written this. Paula's written a wonderful coming-age story about a ballerina, a would-be ballerina in South Dakota, and South Dakota is not really known for ballerinas. So this young girl has to be shipped off to various parts of America to find teachers and to learn her craft. And that's the basics of this story, this coming-of-age novel. It takes place, before I describe it anymore, maybe I should hand it over to you. You have more experience describing the different locations and settings of this story.
Yeah, so it is a coming-of-age story, and it is very autobiographical. It really follows what I did as a young woman, leaving home, leaving South Dakota. It's called Starting From Here, really because she is, this young woman, Renee, really is starting from a deficit. You know, she comes from a cattle trading family that goes back generations. Her father, her grandfather were all cattle traders. There was no idea of dancing or ballet or any kind of classical art in the family. So, so she starts from a deficit. So that's Starting From Here. At the beginning of the book, she's at the beginning of her journey. And she moves from different places to try to kind of pursue her craft. And at the end of the book, you find that we are once again at the beginning of her journey. So the idea of starting from here is that, you know, we're always all starting from here and have to have the kind of resilience to move forward that I hope is kind of shown in the book through this character. She does kind of need to have the resilience to move forward because she's away from her home. And probably for me, like, there are three kind of main reasons that she needs to, that she kind of fulfills in getting away from her home. And the first one is she needs to get away from her family because her family is full of turmoil. And I think she has an understanding that if she stays in her family, she'll be stuck inside that kind of tumultuous vortex and won't be able to excel at anything. And the second reason is that she wants to pursue her art. I mean, she really has a talent for ballet, and she's very physical, and she loves it, and she wants to pursue that, and there's no opportunity where she is. And the third reason, which she's not aware of, is that along the way she's going to have to grow up. So she's 15 when she leaves, so 15, 16, 17, 18, she's going to have to find her way through the adolescent years on her own. And Lisa and I were talking earlier just for a bit, and no, it was Lynn. Lynn and I were talking earlier just for a bit about a young woman who'd moved to New York, and her mother had gone with her. Now, for people of means and who have education, that's the way this is done. You know, you have a young person in the family who has some kind of extraordinary talent, and you support them. If they need to go away, a parent goes with them, or the family goes with them, or there's some kind of support system. And in this particular case, because there wasn't the means to do that, and there wasn't the education so that you knew that that was how it might go, the girl is just kind of sent out into the world. So my hope with this book is that it looks deeply at the kind of struggles and trials of young adolescent girls in this culture because of taking this young girl out of her family, out of her community. She's really set apart, so she's set in relief, and what you see is the pressures of the culture coming down on her. What does she need to do? What does she need to learn to do to be, one, a dancer, to be, two, a young woman? You know, so there's all those questions for me that were really interesting to explore in this book.
I remember when you went off, you left Syracuse to study with Toni Morrison, and I think I'm remembering correctly, and she told you that if you wanted to be a mother, you were going to lose years and decades, possibly, of your writing career.
Yeah.
I also think I'm remembering correctly that you also at one point went 20 years without writing.
Oh, yeah.
Which is a long time to give up a craft, right?
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if that was a blessing in disguise when you look about this material you had to write about. It's such poignant material. It's so strong. But if you had written about it 20 years ago, would it have been better or worse, do you think? Was it a blessing in disguise that you had to wait?
That's a really interesting question because, you know, I think it was a blessing and a curse at the same time. You know, the blessing is that I feel like at my age I have more understanding and I have more empathy for myself as a young girl. I tried to write this book, even the first book, in the first person, and I sent it to Toni Morrison, and she said, you know, okay, she said, I get a good feeling for every character except the main character. She's like, I don't know who she is. I don't know what she wants. I don't, you know, she's just like, I don't know her. And I just understood at that point that what I needed to do was move this main character into the third person so that I could have some distance on my own experience so that I could write about it more freely because, truth be told, I'm a really private person and I don't really share those kind of stories even with my daughters or, you know, people I know. Those are not the stories I will share. So but those were the stories I needed to look at. So the years really helped me in that way because I could look back at this person, this young woman in these difficult situations and really feel for her. That was a plus. I think if I'm being honest, I think the negative part of it, of the waiting, I don't think I could have written it without having matured myself to start with. If I could have written it at that point, I think the timing would have been better in terms of the market. Mm-hmm. I think people would have been a little more interested in that kind of story about women before the Me Too movement. I think now maybe there's a feeling that it's been said or it's been told. I don't think it's been told like I've told it. I think that there's some, I hope there's some depth in the book that is helpful for people or revelatory, but those are the two sides of it. And she actually told me that I should leave my kids with my mother. She didn't know my mother, that's what I thought. So anyway, that's that.
Well, if you enjoy the work of Tobias Wolff, or another writer comes to mind is Evan Connell. Did you read him at Syracuse,
didn't,
Mrs. Bridge, Mr. Bridge?
No, I didn't read it.
He writes in a similar style to you,
wow.
these beautiful vignettes with a sly sense of humor and just subtle endings to the vignettes that resonate. I thought he was maybe a big influence on you, but
I have to read.
maybe it's a good time then just to talk about influences other than Toni Morrison and Tobias Wolff, obviously. Who are the writers who you leaned into when you write?
You know, I can't write like her, but I love Jean Rhys. I love Jean Rhys's work, and she works, I feel like she works in a little bit of a similar not style, but from a similar point of view. A young woman going to England, so she's totally displaced. She has the dancing background, she's a showgirl, right? And then she has all these interactions that are really so difficult and tragic, and she doesn't have any control over, and she doesn't have any power in. I love her work, especially Voyage in the Dark. I think is one of the most beautiful books ever written, and speaks a lot to me about my experience in my culture from her experience in her culture. And yeah, that I would just have to say her, and of course all the people we love, like Raymond Carver and Toby Wolff and Toni Morrison, and all the people I've been fortunate enough to work with.
Yeah, you've been surrounded by superstar writers much of your life, and you've probably gotten a lot of advice from them, other than Toni Morrison telling you to get rid of your kids to your other. Have you gotten especially good or bad advice? I mean, the idea of getting bad advice from a famous writer, you'd almost follow it just because of their reputation. But have you gotten bad advice from famous writers or anything like that?
About you, Lee. I mean, you've had all these writers, you know, too, all these wonderful writers in your life. And for me, and I think we talked about this afternoon a little bit, for me, the biggest thing I got from the writers who I adore and admire is encouragement. You know, really encouragement, like really, you know, because I always feel like, oh, you know, can I do this? I can't do this. Am I going to be able to do this? And for them to be able to say, you know, I mean, one of the things that will always stay with me is that when I was working with Toni Morrison, she said to me, she said, a lot of people can write, but not everybody has something to say, you know. And I just felt like, okay, then if she believes that I have something to say, then I can try, you know. So that kind of encouragement is really, really priceless. Yeah.
That's not bad advice, but yeah.
Yeah. No, I don't think I've ever gotten bad advice. No. Right, I'm sorry. I didn't answer your question.
No, that's fine.
But I can't think of bad advice that I've gotten. No, I can't.
I was also curious, I mean, having written a coming-of-age story novel myself, I'm always curious, what's the difference between a young adult novel and a coming-of-age novel marketed towards adults? What is it that makes either the publishing house or the author decide on one or the other? What separates the two? Because I honestly don't know. If you have a young person and it's a story of their travails, is it the author's choice?
It wasn't for me. Was it for you?
No.
No, yeah.
No.
I think they decide.
But back when I published mine, young adult wasn't. I mean, young adult sells now more than literary fiction, right?
Yeah, it does.
So I would have thought maybe they would be leaning on you to do that, and I'm glad they didn't. But I was curious about that.
Well, you know, there was some talk of it, but then the editor and publisher didn't want to do it. They wanted to do it as a literary fiction. But
good.
I'm glad. Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm
me
glad.
too. Me too. But I don't understand what the difference between the two is, and I feel like I should. I remember when your husband George put out a kid's book, The Very Persistent Gappers of
Fripp.
Fripp, sorry. They decided to market it to adults, right?
Big mistake.
Yeah, and you were the only one saying big mistake.
I said it right in the beginning. You can't do that. You're not going to sell it. You can't do it. And nobody would listen to me, of course. I didn't really even have a voice, but you know, that was their business.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was hoping we could talk a little bit about the different settings. I mean, we have South Dakota, which I know nothing about. Phoenix, I know a little bit about. Denver, a little bit about. And New York. Renee visits each of those and has to try to blend in with the cool crowd or with any kind of crowd. And it's a bit like watching a movie I really liked, The Queen's Gambit, where you have a young woman who's gifted yet alienated.
Right.
And each new setting Renee goes to, she has to try to fit in a different way. And I was wondering which of those settings, you know, the 4 settings, was easiest for you to write about and which was the most difficult and why? Yeah,
Oh gosh, for me, I think they were all equally difficult to write about. And I think that, you know, one of the things that was mentioned, and I'll just bring this up, one of the things that was mentioned in a review that was not so good was that kind of like, where do all these old men come from? Why is she getting together with all these older men? Okay, so here's something for me that kind of was interesting. How is it that, like, I don't really know how to say this, but when you write a book, do you have to explain everything? Like, I don't think that you do. I think you can set things up so that they're seen. So my idea in the book was this young girl is in her family. She's in her community, right? And if you had a drawing of that, what you would have to do is cut her out and move her over to the side. Okay, so now she doesn't have her family and she doesn't have her community, and the people who then she's surrounded by are parents who aren't really interested in her and a community of peers who are her competitors, a group of high school kids who she's not involved with because, like Lee said, she moves from Rapid City to Phoenix to Denver to New York, moving each year, so she doesn't ever establish a group. She's always concerned with ballet, where she's in with her competitors. And so who comes for her? Who comes for her? Well, who's interested in her? Older men, because she's of age. She's 16, she's 17, she's 18, she's pretty, you know? Okay, here come the men. So she's a human being. She needs connection, and these are the people who reach out to her. That, to me, is the critique of the culture that's in the book. That, to me, is why it's not a YA book. For me, that's why it's not a YA book, because this book is, I hope, speaking about the culture and how if a young woman ends up unprotected, those are the people, it's the predatory people who come for her. And you see this earlier in the book when the gay teacher, the gay ballet teacher,
Mr. Dicker,
and his partner, Marcus, they have the same relationship. It's very clearly outlined that that's their relationship, that Marcus didn't have any place to live and no one to be with, and Dicker had been waiting for a young man like that for a long time, and there he was, and he got him. You know, so it was in there, and then it's echoed in the young girl's experience. So to me, that's why it's not YA. Each of the places is difficult to write about because she has to go through different transitions and different challenges in each place. And to answer your question a little better than that, that's kind of goes back to the YA question. But to answer your question about each place, what I really tried to do in the book is kind of have a little bit of a change of voice for her in each location, because she is growing up. In Phoenix, she's 15. In Denver, she's 16, and kind of 16 and turning 17. And then in New York, she's 17 and 18. So it's kind of like the voice, I hoped, matured and changed in each different place.
definitely did.
Yeah, I hope so.
But she was always mature for her age, and which might have been one of the difficulties she faced with her peer sets.
Yeah.
She was kind of an old soul in my reading.
Yeah.
I could be transposing you onto it, I'll admit. You touched upon some of the villains in the novel, and it's a novel with wonderful villains. And a lot of them are predatory, are jealous of her. Golly might be my favorite. And I was hoping you could touch upon some of the villains. But I want to say before you do that I didn't see you treating them vindictively at all. You had a really mature, forgiving approach to these villains. I don't know if I could have forgiven Golly. I don't know if I could forgive, was it Jim Davis?
Oh yeah, Jim Davis.
The perv teacher, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. We lived in a day and age when teachers slept with their students. That wasn't uncommon, even in the high school level, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So maybe we're more forgiving of that than people raised today. But I thought you had just a wonderful, forgiving approach to your villains, and yet they remain villains just by their own action. So what villains were the most fun to write about? Which bit of revenge?
Mr. Dicker. That was great. That was great to write that, because I mean, that guy was beyond anything I've ever experienced before or since in terms of his attack and his just absolute egotism. So I loved writing him, actually. He's not alive, but oh well, I still got him. Anyway. That was fun. He was my favorite.
Evil, but he was still sympathetic because he was obviously just obsessed with Marcus.
Yeah.
And Renee was threatening that, and he just went after Renee in a way that I'll never forget. That was very wonderful writing. Talk a little bit about Golly, please, who I just, I almost hated to see her leave the novel. She was so terrible and awesome at the same time.
Well, yeah, I call her Gally, but whatever.
Gally, excuse me.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Doesn't matter. You got to feel sorry for her, right? You have to feel sorry for her a little bit. I mean, I really do. And maybe this is part of that maturing as a writer or maturing as a person before you approach material that's close to you. Because I don't think I felt much sympathy for her when I was younger. But now I feel like, this poor 15-year-old girl, she has another 15-year-old girl move into her bedroom. Like, what? Why? Like, why does she have to share her parents? Why does she have to share her room? I feel for her, and I feel like maybe I'm sure I wasn't really fair to her, in the long run. I feel like she is a villain in the story, but I'm sure she's not a villain in life, and she had it rough that year with me in the same way that I had it rough that year with her. So, but she actually did write me that little picture, school picture. You're so quiet. Everyone thinks you're not smart. I was like, oh my God. Yeah. So that was that was just crazy. That was crazy.
That was painful to read, but at least she was leaving at that point.
Yeah, exactly.
Although that was actually a very good place for her to be in some ways. I mean,
it was a great place for her
Phoenix,
to be.
where she was getting the instruction she needed. She had an awesome teacher who really cared about her.
Right.
And but she never got a break all the way around. She always, it was always an uphill battle. Our childhoods kind of coincide age-wise, and yet your novel isn't permeated with pop culture at all.
No.
And I find that interesting because my life was driven by pop culture, by TV shows, by movies. I mean, and I think George was the same way. We were both in love with Davy Jones of the Monkees. We both wanted to be left-handed, like Little Joe and Bonanza. Everything, and then we're dealing with Fonzie and stuff like that. These are what we grew up with. That's our models. That was everything to us. Yeah. And you subtracted that whole pop culture world from your novel. And I'm wondering, was that something you did as an author, who you just made that decision, or was that really part of your life? You just weren't part of the pop culture that everybody else was.
Yeah, I didn't subtract anything. I had to like kind of really reach back and think to add anything, because for me that's a blank. George says it's like I was raised in Russia or something, because I have no cultural context of pop culture. I just don't know it at all. So I don't know why. I think maybe because of being in the ballet studio all the time. It's a very kind of cloistered lifestyle. And I just don't know it. So I had to kind of reach back to kind of think, okay, what did I add in there? The Munsters and like, can't even think of it right now.
Oh, that's right. There was a Munster
There was
reference.
a Munster reference. I had to come up with that one, but yeah. So there was a few just to kind of locate it for people, because I know most people have those kind of references, like first in their mind, and so I don't have them.
Yeah, it made me feel like something. I was reading something that took place further back, and reminded me a lot. I thought about the Last Picture Show a lot while reading it.
Wow.
Yeah, and but I enjoyed the lack of pop culture, because pop culture is so easy to write about in stories and in novels. I mean, it engages people because it's common ground.
Right.
But because it's common ground, it's so easy and it's a bit overdone sometimes. There's also not much in the way of religion. You know, we're in the deep South here. Most of us were raised with a horrible fear of Satan, and that made us lean heavily into Jesus, because he was the only thing that could save us from Satan.
Right.
Renee wasn't spared much in childhood, but she didn't seem to be torn apart by religious fears or anything like that.
Well, I was really a religious kid. So I don't know quite, maybe in the first book there's a lot of religious stuff, it seems to me. And the first book kind of covers more the family stuff. It kind of switches point of view and kind of tells the whole story of the family, so that by the end of the first book, like, most of the family has already passed away. But in this second book, I was really sticking strictly to her point of view. And even though I was a really religious kid during those years, my focus was so strong on ballet, and also then my sense of survival, you know, my need to survive those years was so kind of tight that I don't think religion really played a part in it for me. I really just needed to be at the studio, and I needed to be concentrated, and I needed to figure out what I needed to do, and that's what I needed to do. And that's kind of where it ended. It was a pretty small world in that way. Yeah.
Tobias Wolff told me, and you too, I bet, that you're only allowed one dream per book as a writer. I don't know if that's good advice or bad advice. I like dreams, but I understand that they annoy a lot of people if you talk about your dreams. Renee has an interesting dream that's quite a revelation to her. She dreams about her mother, and she's miserable. She's far from home. She's having a lot of trouble dealing with her present situation, and her mother appears to her in a dream and says, "You can turn your mind away."
Yeah.
I was hoping you could talk about that moment, because it seemed very pivotal to Renee and very important.
Yeah, that's a really important moment, and it didn't happen then at all. It happened many, many years later, just before my mom passed away. I had that dream, and that was a real dream, and it was such an important dream for me. And it explained so much to me about, like, what my mother had taught me. I'm gonna cry, oh my gosh. My mother really had that kind of stoicism, you know, that you were in control of your mind. And that came to me really early as a child, I think. So that, you know, that idea of in that dream, the mother is in a wedding gown, and she's perched over a rushing river. And I know in that dream that she's going to go. And that was so sad. And so then she said, "You can turn your mind away." And I was like, yeah. It stuck with me since then. You know, that is the power of being a human being. Maybe. I don't know what it's like to be an animal, but, you know, maybe they also have this power. But this is one of the great powers of being a human being, is that we can turn our mind, and we can decide where our mind takes us and where our mind goes. And that's really Renee's journey throughout the book. She has to focus her mind, and she has to turn her mind in the right direction, or she is lost. That really is her great goal. And I think, it's kind of interesting, like growing up on the plains of South Dakota, and then, becoming like a Buddhist. We study Buddhism, and I really love it. And one of the things about Buddhism is, your mind leads you. And to have learned that from my mother, and to have had my mother tell me that directly in a dream, it was just too good not to use. And so there it is. So that's kind of one of the things that takes it from being memoir to being fiction. I'm using everything I've got to try to tell this story, and that seemed to belong there because Renee needed it then. Yeah. So
Your mom really emerges as a hero in this novel, much more so than the first novel, Distant Home, I think.
Yeah.
She really comes through in the clutch, and it's kind of surprised me in doing so, and it was very inspiring ending, I thought, in that sense. She was a fascinating character. Should we you want to read a little bit from it?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Can I use yours?
You can use mine, definitely.
Do you want me to read any particular thing, Lee? Or do you want me to just read something?
Read what you care.
Okay. I'll just read from the beginning. This is actually chapter 2. And so in this chapter, Renee and her brother were dancers. Her brother was kind of chased out of dancing, out of ballet, by being teased so terribly, and being ignored by his father, and kind of reprimanded by his father for dancing. Whereas Renee was praised for her dancing by the culture and by her family. So that was a big boon for her. So she gets to a certain point where she needs to move away to excel, or to try to excel at her craft, and so she moves away. So now she's just moved from South Dakota to Phoenix. This is chapter 2. A street ran by the house where she was staying in Phoenix, the house where she lived, the house where Eve and Al were paying good money for her to be. She didn't know what street it was, or what part of town it was in, or whether it followed a river or led to a highway. The house was in the country, or nearly in the country. At least there weren't any other stores or other houses nearby, not that she could see. It seemed like maybe there was a railroad. At night she imagined a freight train running right across the street, which she knew it didn't do. But it was definitely in the country, because there were lemon trees in the back, and grapefruits and limes, plus a stone walkway that led to a little cottage where a grandmother lived, though Renee had never seen her. There have to be neighbors somewhere, she thought. Maybe way down the road where the cars disappear? But she was too young to drive, and the parents at this house never continued down the road in front. They simply turned left out of the driveway, rounded the nearest corner, and went straight ahead onto a street that was empty, but for large warehouses set off in dusty fields dotted with sparse bunches of what must have been cactus. And suddenly, instead of far-off jagged mountain peaks like back home, there were low-slung strip malls popping up, multiplying, coming to line both sides of whatever thoroughfare they'd ended up on. Chapter 3. All her life she'd been told she was beautiful. In summer, the sun streaked her hair with gold and sprinkled her nose with pale freckles. And her mother said she was beautiful, and her grandmother said she was beautiful, and everyone she met seemed to comment on some aspect of her appearance. Her dark blonde hair falling down the length of her back or woven into 2 long braids, her long legs and lean build, her dark brows and long lashes, her blue-gray eyes and Cupid's bow mouth and sweet smile. Well, isn't she a picture? Isn't she a beauty? Look out, ha ha ha, people would say, winking at Al or giving Eve a look of warning. And she was all right. She was good-looking for sure. But no matter that everyone seemed to agree that a girl should be at least pretty enough to attract a stranger's attention, she could see now that for her, being pretty was going to be complicated. Because the dad at this house in Phoenix, who was thin and hairy and supposedly an orthodontist, though he never seemed to go to work, sat every night in his chair pretending to watch television as he snuck sidelong glances at her in her white cotton nightie. Every night, after she'd changed out of her ballet clothes, He trained his eyes on her as if she were the fox and he'd gone a-hunting, scratching his head and thighs with abandon, enormous flakes of dandruff raining onto his bathrobe as he ogled her through thick Coke bottle glasses, grinning and blushing. "He's taking time off," the mom told her quietly one morning, seeming to be both apologizing and attempting to explain. Though Renee hadn't asked why the dad sat in his chair day and night like that, she'd been wondering. "He had a heart attack last spring and he's very weak," the mom whispered, pouring milk into a serving pitcher. And strange as he was, Renee felt sorry for him, not just because of the heart attack. She could see how his whole life must have been lonely. So she figured that under the circumstances, she shouldn't mind if he looked at her that way, piercing the thin white of her nightie with his big round eyeballs. But she did mind. It bothered her. She'd only brought the one nightie, since there were other, more important things she'd needed to pack when she left home, and it was white, not sheer, but not sheer either. Still, the mom's explanation clarified one thing, and Renee began to understand why they'd agreed to let her live with them here, wherever this actually was, in the first place. Despite the blooming succulent garden, the hardy fruit trees, the meandering pink stone walkway, the lush green vines winding up to the awnings, with the orthodontist spending whole days in his leather recliner in front of the television, they likely needed the money Eve and Al were sending. The mom was a tall German-looking housewife who kept her hair in a long, smooth roll at the base of her neck, ear to ear like a croissant, and maintained a constant cheerfulness, wearing a grin that wasn't really a grimace, though it often seemed to Renee that it might be. She kept to an internal code of conduct and had a simple way of being nice, while at the same time making you notice she wasn't losing her temper. But the grandmother, who lived in the little cottage at the end of the pink stone path just beyond the grove of citrus trees, was only for the real children, their children, a younger boy, Heinrich, called Henry, and a girl Renee's same age, Galliena, called Gallie, who was in both Renee's ballet class and her class at school. Catching sight of Renee in the school hallways, Gallie would lean into her circle of friends and laugh into her hand, clearly whispering about Renee's tall knee-highs and too long uniform skirt, since the rest of the girls at Mother Mary Ignatius wore shoes with no socks in defiance of dress code and skirts hemmed up to just under their bums. She'd perform the gesture even when the other girls didn't join in, even when it caused them to look at her skeptically. And she applied variations of the same at ballet class, pulling girls close to make side-eye remarks about her new roommate, about the way Renee's leotard fit low and flat around the tops of her legs and high around her neckline, like some dancer from the olden days, or how Renee pinned her two long braids across the top of her head for class in what Renee's own grandma had called a golden crown, but which too easily suggested the name Gallie made sure Renee overheard, Rebecca of Sunnybrook Farm. There's the beginning.
Golly.
Gallie, you monster.
She is. I haven't forgiven her. You have. I was wondering if there are any questions from the audience for Paula. Bill?
Did you have to do a lot of research to verify the memory in terms of the period of time?
No, I didn't do any research, and I really don't work that way. I don't work like with doing research. That's not my style. And I think memory is a really important question, because I would never claim that anything in this book is true. I feel like the memory that I work with is a structure that I kind of carry around. And I'm looking at that structure. I'm not trying to recreate what happened. I'm trying to look at the structure that I carry around and examine it. And so that structure is, like memory, it's been built. It's not something that actually happened necessarily. It's been built and it's been changed and it's grown and it's been reduced. And so very malleable. So I work with memory in that way, not by trying to tell a true story, but by trying to look at my own recollections and memories. Does that kind of answer your question?
Absolutely.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Lisa?
I have to admit I was a little bit disappointed at the end, because I wanted, of course,
Don't give stuff away.
her debut in New York. Fabulous dancer and everything. I mean, is there any chance there'd be a sequel?
Oh yeah, this was written, I always had a plan to write 3 books, to write this one, first one, this one, and the next one. And actually, because of the pandemic, I ended up writing the second and the third one together as one big book. So I had this enormous like monster book where it goes on from New York, and so nobody was having it. Nobody was like, no, this isn't. The second half of this book just didn't work. So I realized, oh yeah, my plan was always to have 3. Let's find a place to cut it and work with that first section of it until she gets to New York. So that's what I did. I kind of cut that down. I've got this 3rd book to work on. Yeah, I can't promise you a blazing debut, but yes, there's a 3rd book.
The ending as it stands is pretty spectacular. I thought it was exhilarating, and the writing about New York was as evocative and alive as anything in the novel, I felt like. Anybody else? Jude?
I was kind of interested about the relationship between kind of fiction and kind of truth in the book, because I remember reading another author had written like an autobiographical novel, and they said one of the advantages of writing it as a novel rather than as a memoir was that they could give people happier endings than they got in real life. So were there things that you changed in writing this book that, from how things actually happened?
Well, I think that the dream thing we talked about, that was one thing that really, that I took advantage of. I used whatever I had in whatever ways I could throughout. But I know that there's a real addiction to happy endings in our culture, and maybe just in humanity. Maybe we just love a happy ending. But I'm not into it. I don't really buy it. I don't think it's real. I don't think it's helpful. And I always suffer for that in terms of publishing and kind of getting a book out there. So just this ending was as uplifting as I could do. That was it. That was as good as I could do in terms of getting some kind of updraft. But I feel like it's really interesting because if you read, we were talking about Jean Rhys earlier, if you read Voyage in the Dark, at the end, she's had this love affair that's gone so terribly wrong, and she's been so terribly abused. And then she goes on this kind of, as I remember it, on a kind of bender of love affairs. She's just having affairs with everyone and is drunk and having all these problems, and she gets pregnant. And then she has to find a way to get an abortion. So she's in a dingy hotel room. The doctor comes in, gives her an abortion, and says basically something like, as she's kind of out of it, he says basically something like, well, I'll do it this time, but she'll be right back at it. Okay, to me, that's an ending. I love that because that's real. This whole picture of women being totally abused in relationships and then ending up in trouble and needing help, and the person who helps them looks down on them. That to me is like, that's a story. That's what I like. So I have a lot of trouble because I don't find these happy endings, and I really don't feel like any interest in manipulating my experience to come up with a rosy view at the end. I don't. I have much more interest in trying to communicate an experience that I've had and stored as something important for me, trying to communicate that in a way that people can see it without having to twist it into, oh yeah, living happily ever after or something. That's a big thing for me and a really important question for me. So yeah, thank you for asking that. I don't know if I'll ever be successful at getting this 3rd book off, but we'll see. I'm gonna try.
Everett?
I was really moved by Renee's relationship with Leon, and some of my favorite parts in this book were his scenes, and I think he figured a little bit more prominently in the first book. Do you see yourself returning to him? I think I heard in an interview you said something about like maybe one day writing from his perspective?
I would love to be able to do that. I would love to be able to write from Leon's perspective. I have that as a dream of mine, and that would be like, if I can finish this third book and I'm still alive, maybe I'll give it a try. Maybe I won't live that long, but I'd love to try it. I don't know that I have the resources to do it. I was having a conversation with a good friend of ours, Kath Anderson, who's a poet who was in the fiction, or who was in the writing program with us. And she wrote a poem about her brother, who was also like a disappearing person. You know, the brother's in the family, but then they disappear from the family, and you don't really know enough about their experience to even relate with them. And also, I just read Amy Bender wrote a novel, I can't remember the name of it, but in it her brother disappears into a chair. He just becomes a chair. And so I feel like a lot of us women have brothers we don't know because somehow they've been alienated from the family. So I would love to write more about Leon. Someday maybe I'll feel like I have the resources to do it. I don't right now. Thanks.
Anybody else? Well, one last question, if nobody else has one. I was wondering if you ever encouraged or encountered your daughters becoming interested in ballet, and how you approach that.
That's a good question, Lee. Yeah, they were kind of interested in it. I think when they were really young, I said, you can do anything but ballet. So they did karate and they did gymnastics a little bit. I just we're not doing ballet. And then when they got a little older and they were kind of like, oh, you want to try it? Then they did it for a while, but then they had the maturity. They were like maybe 11, 12. Elena especially was like 11, 12. And she had the maturity to look around the classroom and say, this is ridiculous. People shouldn't be treated like this, even in that particular classroom in Syracuse, New York. And that was a good teacher. And I think, one of the things that happened is around 12, 13 years old, the teacher started shaming the girls for their bodies and the way their bodies were changing. And Elena was mature enough to see that and say, I don't want any part of this. And so, yeah. So no, not when they were young, and then when they were older, they had their own experience.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, if there's any more questions, thank you so much for coming out this evening.
Thank you guys
Really
for coming
appreciate
out,
seeing you.
really. Thank you. Thank you.